Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1076 for September 29th, 2024. Coming up in a few minutes.
We are a few guys that have founded it, and we've all had international careers and been, living abroad. But we had this old dream from 20 years back when we were whiskey enthusiasts, and we were the first to found a whiskey appreciation society, a whiskey club on the Faroe Islands. And all the way back then, we had this idea of making a whiskey distillery on the Faroe Islands.
Danial Hoydal is one of the founders of the Faer Isles Distillery in the Faroe Islands, located in the North Atlantic between Orkney and Iceland. It's as about a remote place as you can find to make whiskey, but Faer Isles has built a worldwide community of investors through 2 crowdfunding campaigns. I'll talk with Danial Hoydal later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Gabriel Cardarella from Jewers here. The 2024 U.S. Open Championship may have ended, but you can still get your hands on the whiskey created to honor it. The new Jewers 19-Year-Old Champions Edition. Trust me, a whiskey you don't want to miss. More details coming up.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. Shipments of whiskeys to the U.S. East Coast could be disrupted by a strike as early as Tuesday. Dock workers at 36 East Coast ports are set to walk out after failing to reach a new contract with port operators. Most shipments of Scotch whiskey travel to the U.S. by container ship, and the dock workers want guarantees against losing their jobs to automation at the ports. The strike comes as many whiskey makers are trying to build up inventories ahead of the holiday shopping season. The Black Bourbon Society is winding up its operations. Founder Samara Davis told Food and Wine magazine this week that she's proved the African-American demographic as a valued consumer base for bourbon makers. The final release from the society will come in November when it re-releases its debut barrel pick, a Maker's Mark private selection that won double gold medal honors in 2019 at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. We have lots of new releases to talk about this week, starting with the unveiling of this year's special releases from Diageo. It's the second edition of Stuart Morrison's Spirited Exchange series from last year and does a deep dive into flavor exploration with 8 whiskeys from Mortlach, Talisker, The Singleton, Lagavulin, Benrinnes, Kalila, Oban, and the second ever release from Rose Isle Distillery. Prices range from $105 a bottle for the Talisker Tidal Churn to $480 for the 21-year-old Benrinnes Grand Crescendo. Diageo is also unveiling the first collection created by new creative director Philippe Starck. There are 3 new single malts in the L'Evolution collection: Begin, Become, and Beyond. Begin and Beyond are paired together with a recommended retail price of $10,000 a set, while Become stands alone at a recommended price of $365 a bottle. Bimber Distillery is also releasing 8 new single malts in the second tranche of its Shoulders of Giants series that pays tribute to some of the world's greatest thinkers and innovators. The single cask bottlings honor such visionaries as Charles Darwin, Winston Churchill, Albert Einstein, and Ludwig van Beethoven. They'll be available in the UK, Germany, Belgium, and Poland with a recommended retail price of £94 each. The Glenlivet is celebrating its 200th anniversary with a special release. It's the oldest official distillery bottling of the Glenlivet yet at 55 years old. Just 100 bottles will be available for $55,000 each. The Isle of Harris Distillery is adding to its Hiroc range with a new Oloroso sherry cask-finished malt. The lightly peated whiskey will sell for around £75 a bottle in the UK. Loch Lomond Distillers is releasing a new annual collection of Little Mill single malts from the distillery that closed 30 years ago this year and burned down 20 years ago. Cask Reflections Release Number 1 is a 33-year-old single malt finished in Japanese Mizunara oak casks for 4 months. Only 570 bottles are available worldwide at a price tag of £3,800 a bottle. India's Rampur Distillery released a new single malt this weekend at Whisky Live Paris. Rampur Barrel Blush is finished in Australian Shiraz wine casks and will be available in Europe, the UK, and the US with a recommended retail price of $105 a bottle. Barrel Craft Spirits is out with a new ice wine cask-finished bourbon. It blends together bourbons from Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Wyoming, then finished the blend in ice wine casks and bottled it at cask strength. It's available at select retailers around the U.S. for $90 a bottle. Heaven Hill has released the year's final batches of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof and Larceny Barrel Proof. Both are labeled batch number C924, and the wheated larceny is bottled at 62.55% ABV. The Rye Forward Elijah Craig is bottled at 64.5% ABV and carries a recommended retail price of $74.99 a bottle. The larceny is priced at $64.99. Bulleit Bourbon is adding a 10-year-old rye whiskey to its lineup. The rye is made at MGP and follows up on the re-release of Bulleit's 12-year-old rye this summer. And finally, Wyoming Whiskey has a new master blender. Edrington has named Brendan Cook to take over for longtime master blender Nancy Fraley, who stepped aside at the end of last year. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. The Halifax International Spirits Fest kicks off the week on Thursday night and runs through Saturday in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Edinburgh's Whiskey Festival takes place on Saturday in Edinburgh, Scotland. That same day is Bourbon on the Banks in Frankfort, Kentucky. Whiskies of the World Atlanta is on the 12th. The Manchester Whiskey Festival is on the 18th and 19th in Manchester, England. And the San Diego Spirits Festival is on the 19th and 20th. Finally, the inaugural Whiskey Global Toronto is on the 19th. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Every year, Dewar's, the official Scotch whiskey of the U.S. Open Championship, rolls out a special limited edition whiskey to celebrate that year's tournament. The 2024 championship wrapped up in June, but the 2024 Dewar's 19-year Pinehurst edition is available now, and you don't want to miss it. This year's 19-year whiskey is double-aged, then extra-matured in rye casks, offering a rich profile with notes of pear and heather honey. There's a hint of spice in there, too, along with a dusting of cinnamon and cocoa powder. It's a sensory delight for any true whiskey or golf fan. So trust me, my fellow aficionados, grab a bottle and enjoy a whiskey crafted with the same skill and precision that makes the U.S. Open legendary. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 46% alcohol by volume. Imported by John Dewar & Sons, Coral Gables, Florida.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. The Faroe Islands are about as remote as you can get while still being close to civilization, and the islands are home to arguably one of the most remote distilleries in the world. The Faer Isles Distillery opened in 2021 and started laying down its first stocks of whiskey early last year, using a series of warehouses inspired by the shacks that are used to dry meat and fish on the islands. I caught up with co-founder Danial Hoydal on a Zoom call the other day. First of all, for our listeners who may not be aware, where are the Faroe Islands?
Exactly, yeah. It's in the middle of nowhere, practically. I mean, it's funny that you asked that because we recently found out that we're probably the most remote distillery location in the world. We asked Google and ChatGPT, and they confirmed this. So it's in the middle of the North Atlantic between Scotland, Norway, and Iceland, basically.
And why build a distillery there?
Good question. Well, we are a few guys that have founded it, and we've all had international careers and been, living abroad. But we had this old dream from 20 years back when we were whiskey enthusiasts, and we were the first to found a whiskey appreciation society, a whiskey club on the Faroe Islands. And all the way back then, we had this idea of making a whiskey distillery on the Faroe Islands. And why, you can say, of course, visiting distilleries in Scotland very often, we were always told that it was the ideal climate to mature whiskey. And looking into what they meant by optimal climate, it was always this very stable year-round temperature and humid environment with the salty, windy air. We were just thinking, well, we have more of everything. So if that's the ideal climate, it must be even more special on the Faroe Islands. And then there was the other aspect, which was that we have a tradition on the Faroe Islands, a culinary tradition, where we have preserved and matured food, mainly fish and lamb, for centuries, using drying houses where you have this slatted, where the gust is invited in to dry up the food and basically ferment it also. And we were thinking, let's use this old tradition to apply to whiskey and see what happens. So it was sort of those two factors, being a new whiskey destination that nobody had heard of and in a place that nobody heard of, and then this old culinary tradition that sort of sparked it all.
The distillery was built, I believe, in 2021, correct?
We started producing other spirits in 21, but we started the construction earlier than that. So you might say the distillery was finished and ready for production in 21. That's true, yeah.
And so your first whiskey won't be ready until 2026, I believe, according to your website.
Exactly. So we were distilling other spirits, and the whole whiskey project was very much delayed due to Corona. All of a sudden, we couldn't get any copper, we couldn't get any steel, particularly when you're placed in a very remote place that we are. So it was delayed for very long, more than a year. So we didn't start whiskey production until early last year. So 26 will be the first early 26 will be the first legal whiskey, but we plan to launch it probably late 26, just to have some more time to work on the flavor and maturation.
How does the spirit taste so far?
Well, actually, we are really happy with it, and we have started sending it out to a few people that we trust in the industry and people who know how to appreciate young malt like that, and had really great feedback. And I would love to send something over to you as well, but it's a bit difficult to send samples to the US.
Yes, I know.
I will try to do that because we have found a way, I think, through a French company to get it over. We have a US distributor who's quite interested in working with us, so we have to make it work.
Tell me about the crowdfunding aspect about this, because you have owners all over the world, don't you?
Exactly, yes. This was sort of an idea from the very beginning, both, of course, to get some funding, but it was also to see, is it possible to create a community that is sort of more or less worldwide, even though you're placed in a very, very remote location? And so we just tried. We created our own platform on our website. We had to go through a lot of legal work and all that to get the permits and so on. But instead of using one of the sort of standard crowdfunding platforms, we did our own, and basically just promoted it via Facebook. And that we hit a nerve or something, because we now have done 2 rounds, and we now have more than 1,000 shareholders in 31 countries. So that's really a humbling thought, and also a great thought to feel that we are sort of part of a bigger community, even though it's sometimes feel quite lost here in the middle of the ocean.
How do you deal with 1,000 shareholders?
Well, they have behaved quite nice so far, and they are sort of really great backers. We had a founders club, and we also have followers, and we have had a private cask program where people can buy casks, and we can see the same people sort of and the same countries sort of being represented again and again. So there's a lot of loyalty, and we are of course really thankful for that and happy about that. Even some that have visited us after becoming aware that there was a distillery in this place. So it's a great thought and sensation.
Tell me more about these warehouses.
Yeah, I mean, so the traditional Faroese warehouse is very small. These drying houses that are called chatler here, and they're typically next to every house of where people live here. And there you have your lamb and your fish and so on hanging there. So you'll see when you drive around, you'll see these strange houses that you can see through when you drive past them or walk past them. And we just scaled it up basically so that we can fit in all the barrels that we have. So all of a sudden you can see this, it's like 4 buildings built next to each other, 21 meters long, where a normal sort of drying house is maybe 2 by 2 meters or something like that, just for your own consumption. And they're built on a hill that is sort of overlooking the fjord, so it's really, really beautiful. We love to have guests there also to show this is where the casks are stored and matured, and it's a different aspect to a lot of what's going on in other countries where it's more the logistical or if economic aspect that decides where the casks are placed for maturation.
What's your angel share like?
Well, of course, it's too early to say what it will be over a longer time. We have an expectation that it will be a little bit higher than Scotland because we have this, as I mentioned at the beginning, very stable year-round temperature. So it doesn't get really cold in the winter, and that means that we have an active period that's longer. We don't have any winters where the maturation basically stops. So we're expecting a bit higher angel share than Scotland. So maybe closer to 2% than the sort of, I think the average in Scotland is 1.5% or something like that.
What challenges have you faced in trying to get the distillery up and running besides the construction problems during COVID?
Well, of course, we had the challenge that there's no know-how here on the island, so we had to get specialists. Basically, the design engineering company that designed the distillery and a lot of the work, specialist work that has been done in the construction and everything. We had to get Scottish people up here, and the stills were from Speyside Distillery, and so a lot of stuff we had to get from the outside, and even on the knowledge side. So that has been a challenge, and there's really good shipping connections with Scotland for historic reasons. So we can get malt here reasonably quick, which is of course important. But it's all the time we have to think about that extra step, because we're in a very remote location. So, but now we've been doing it for some time, and it works out quite well, I think, now.
Can you grow barley on the Faroe Islands?
You can. There is an original strain of barley that is now being preserved by the National Museum here on the Faroe Island, and is grown in sort of secluded areas just to keep it alive. And we have done some experiment with a local farmer who's also the one who's taking off all our draff and using it for cattle feed and so on, so that we don't have any waste product. Of course, the yield is nowhere near what you will get in this very highly cultivated malts that you have in Scotland, and we haven't used it for whiskey yet, but we're definitely planning to do some special editions later on with some local malts. Of course, there is a very, very small drying floor that is being used for some small beer for a local brewery that we plan to try something on, but we haven't come to that yet. Now it's very, very much focused on getting the current recipe and all the production just perfected. But there's also a lot of peat here on the islands. It's actually the reason why they believe that the Vikings settled here, because we don't have trees. So the peat was necessary to create fire. And so we definitely also want to experiment with that down the line.
That should be interesting. I wonder what Faroe Islands peat would taste like in a whiskey.
Exactly. It has a different composition than the Scottish peat. Of course, Scottish peat is also different from whether you are in the north or in the Highlands or on the islands and so on, because the decomposed plant material is different. But the Faroese definitely has a different composition. People have been asking also, what kind of whiskey are you trying to create up there? We had this mantra that we had from the beginning, that we wanted to distill the Faroe Islands. And what does that mean? That means that when we're doing our other spirits, we're using a lot of local seaweed to get that very maritime flavor that we're looking for. And we then, when we made the whiskey recipe, we worked a lot with Gordon Steele, who's the sort of our main consultant on the flavor development. He made the most recent one is probably the Harris whiskey that people will recognize and know. And he tried to be very, very specific about what we meant by that. And that was a really healthy exercise for us, because we had to define, what do we mean by a maritime flavor? What aspects of a maritime flavor is it that we want to promote? Is it a seaweed flavor, or is it a brine flavor, or is it a iodine flavor? So we were talking a lot about that. And then we were talking about grassy notes, because everything is very, very green and grassy up here, and we don't have very few trees. How could we get that through in a balanced way, and so on and so on. So we were trying to define what the distilled version of the Faroe Islands is in whiskey terms, and that was really interesting, and that's what the recipe we have now ended up with. So and again with the peat also, it's a lightly to medium peated whiskey, to reflect that we have this abundance of peat here on the islands. We didn't want to create a sort of really peat bomb like we have on Island and other places, but still the peat has to be there. So to cut it short, it's a maritime flavored, lightly peated whiskey that reflects the origin. Where we are. So we're also using Scottish malt at the moment, and it's what makes sense also to be. As Gordon is saying, we're experimenting with so many different things that we need to play it safe with some aspects. So we're using Scottish malt at the moment, and we're also primarily using bourbon barrels from the States, and of course. We are trying to mature on all kinds of casks, just to see how our recipe and our maturation is working out on that. That's natural for a new distillery, but the bulk is, I think, 85% of everything that is matured on American bourbon.
Thanks to Danial Hoydal of Faer Isles Distillery for joining us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Oban, a deliciously smooth single malt known for its coastal charm and Highland heritage, loved by whiskey lovers worldwide. Discover Oban's full lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with a whiskey I teased last week during the news, but then forgot to share the tasting notes for it later on. Milam & Green's third edition of Unabridged is their unfiltered cask-strength blend of 6 different bourbons, ranging from 3.5 to 10 years old. It's bottled at 59% ABV, and the nose has touches of honeysuckle, old leather, brown sugar, oak, and tobacco. The taste is sweet, dry, and spicy, with cinnamon and chili powder on top of creme brulee, chocolate, and marzipan, and the finish is long and spicy with a gentle sweetness underneath. I'm scoring Milam & Green's Unabridged Volume 3 a 93. Got to taste Glenfiddich's new Grand Chateau 31-year-old the other night at the Keepers of the Quake USA chapter dinner in New York City. It's finished in Bordeaux wine casks and bottled at 47.6% ABV. The nose has touches of raspberry jam, cherries, red apples, and dried flowers. The taste is fruity and floral, with notes of raspberries, allspice, honey, and a touch of vanilla in the background. The finish is long and fruity, and I'm scoring the Glenfiddich Grand Chateau 31-year-old Scotch a 94. I also got to try the new 38-year-old double-double blended malt from Dewar's. This year's version is a year older and finished in PX sherry casks from Royal Brackla Distillery. The nose is dusty with touches of rose petals, butterscotch, a kiss of smoke, honey, and vanilla. The taste has a creamy mouthfeel with notes of fig jam, white pepper, dates, and a soft oakiness, while the finish is long and subtle. I'm scoring the Dewar's double-double 38-year-old blended malt a 95. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of nearly 3,800 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey. Weekend Drams posted this note in the WhiskyCast community app after getting back from a trip to Ireland. Had a fantastic time checking out Ireland. I feel like I could spend a year there and still not have enough time to take it all in, whiskeys included. I wanted to thank everyone for recommending distilleries and experiences. Glad we could help, and if you haven't visited Ireland yet, it should be on your bucket list. Had a couple of comments after I posted a quick story on the upcoming dock workers' strike in the app. The Tracer Bullet said, quote, "Not good. Whiskey is already getting too expensive." And Christopher Glenn had a one-word response, yikes. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, download the free WhiskyCast community app and join the conversation. You can also find us on X, Threads, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast, and our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com.
Trevor Harris, Alan Ross and Amy Jackson, Pat and Dennis Booth, Alan Mooney, John MacDonald. Just a few of the growers who helped to make us the biggest distillers of organic whiskey in the world. Waterford Whiskey, the most naturally flavoursome single malt.
Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. This week we're actually going to go behind the creation of a label, in this case a celebrity whiskey from Scottish actor James Cosmo. You may have seen him in Braveheart, Game of Thrones, and many other movies and TV shows over the years. His new blended scotch is called the Storyman, and I spent a few minutes going through the origin story behind it with him the other night at the Keepers of the Quake dinner.
I'd made a movie called The Outlaw King with Chris Pine, and which was a great experience. He's a lovely young man, and I was contacted shortly afterwards, and they wanted to produce a whiskey called Outlaw King. And they asked me to come up and endorse it or whatever. And it was up in the border country, Annandale Distillery. And so I went up and then and did my thing, you know, and the whiskey. However, they had a problem of copyright or whatever, and it never happened. But I'd met all these guys at this boutique distillery. Professor David Thompson and his wife, and I saw the dedication that they had to making really, really good whiskey. And I said to my business partner, Andy Pancioli, that I thought it would be a good idea if I could have a whiskey that I could give to my friends. You know, that was it. You know, like maybe a couple of 100 bottles, you know, like that was it. Nothing more. And then through discussions with Annandale, we discovered that there was a much bigger market to that, and that people might like a whiskey that I had not created, but I had endorsed all the way through, you know. And I worked with Keith Law, who had just retired from Diageo as a head blender, and he blended a whiskey, and it took about 2 years to get the whiskey that I really wanted, you know, for my particular taste. And we called it Storyman. They did all the research and all that sort of dark arts of advertising, you know. But they came up with the name of Storyman. And I am very proud of the work that those folk have done. You know, it was extraordinary. It's a beautiful whiskey. You know, we've been up against some of the major players and knocked them out the park as far as you know, cost and quality are concerned. So I'm very pleased about it, and just want to bring it to hopefully to a bigger market, you know. But it'll be what it wants to be, you know. We'll get there.
What's the origin of the name Storyman?
Well, David Thompson, he owns a company called MRI, which is a big market research company, and it wasn't really my idea, you know. They maybe it's because I talk too much, but they decided that the whole idea about my whiskey is it's about warmth and fellowship and sitting by an open fire and the stories being told. It's very traditional, you know, and I make no excuse for that. It is, you know, it's a sipping whiskey, you know. It's not bang bang down you go. It really is a sipping whiskey, and develops that bond of you know, people being together and community and enjoying it, and that's what I wanted to create, and that's what they came up with.
Who have you given bottles to so far?
Well, the first one was to my very good friend John Krasinski, you know, from The Office in America, and Jack Ryan and The Quiet Place. And John and I, we were working on Jack Ryan in Budapest, and I told him about my whiskey, which was just about to come out, and he's a big fan of it. It's great. And so that was the first person I gave it to. Alex Salmond, at that time the First Minister of Scotland, got some. He enjoys that. But I just want to put out there, you know, it's no big deal. It's not a big marketing campaign. I just want people to think, well, you know, James Cosmo really loves this whiskey. It's something that I've developed, and it's in my taste. So if you like that, that's great.
The Storyman may be coming to the U.S. soon. Talks with an importer are ongoing, and I'll share my tasting notes for the Storyman soon at whiskycast.com. Thanks to James Cosmo for sharing his story with us this week on Behind the Label. And if there's something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, and, of course, a complete archive of past episodes that goes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the WhiskyCast Community app. Download it today from your app store. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
The 2024 release of Dewar's 19-Year-Old Champions Edition is out now, available at Dewars.com. Get it while you can and appreciate every double-aged rye cask finished dram. Please drink responsibly.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2024, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.